Well, I read it.
I mean, I've read it too, and I just kind of broke it down into the definitions, which I don't have any problem with, but I was just.
Yeah, I reviewed it and I didn't have a problem taking that out there.
Basically taken almost out of the
Yeah.
state. So
Yeah.
the only issue that she said we should look at is where we would permit it.
Yes, that's on page 3. Where would we allow facilities? What facilities and where would we allow? Yeah. I mean, we have listed all the, I think all the possible licenses available here.
I wanted to ask one question.
Go
I
ahead.
don't know
Go.
if Nathan has the most information on this or not, but I was reading that, I was actually over in Kalkaska over the weekend, went through the city, and they've got a few medical marijuana, or medical and recreational over there now. And somebody told us that they were that a person is building a medical or a recreational cafe downtown Kalkaska. And I said, the person that told me this, I said, well, I don't think they have the licensing for that yet. So is it running through the legislature that they're going to do this, or is that?
As far as I know, that's been on the horizon now for a few months, with Kalkaska abiding by all state statutes to get this point.
That's gotta be a different regulation though.
Yeah, you know what, I think the biggest snafu there is going to be how they regulate the testing for driving under the influence. I think that's their biggest concern, is what is their testing mechanisms?
Who's they?
Any law enforcement agency.
But I meant as far as Kalkaska is going, building this basically restaurant, or like a bar or marijuana use. What are they doing it under?
I don't know exactly which license that they're folding that into.
Because as I was reading ours, there's a part there that it says there will be no smoking, no this, no that in the commercial part of, when you can sell it commercially, but you're not allowed to smoke or test it or try it out, or, and that's the language. So I'm wondering, is that the area that in a commercial situation that if you as a township or could say that you can do that in those? I mean, that's what I'm trying to figure out.
As it stands, Mr. Courier?
Please let me know if
No, yeah, by all
Yeah, you
means,
can
this
speak.
is-
You may know more than us about it.
Because
So
this was real news to me. I mean,
But I think it's a city regulation. That's not the state. That back part of your city
It's
stuff.
up to the city or township or government to determine how they want to do those things. But I was wondering, is it a straight license that's going to be separate, that the state hasn't come up with yet, and they're working on it, and they're just trying to jump on this before, so they're ready? Or are they working under something that exists, and they're just saying, as a city, we're going to let in our commercial buildings that where they sell marijuana, we're going to have, they can do a cafe too.
So
Okay.
the state has said that they cannot consume on a retail location whatsoever.
Right.
So nothing that Kalkaska does can supersede that. What they can do is there's another license type called consumption lounge.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what Kalkaska is going off of, but they may be incorporating consumption lounge into their recreational ordinance.
But what I'm asking is the consumption license you're saying,
Mhm.
is that, well, I know, but is it through a licensing? You
Yes.
understand what I'm saying? So
Yes.
that's a licensing through the state of Michigan.
Correct.
So how come it's not said that way? Like what I have learned, we have 6.
Mhm.
So is that a 7th?
There are, as in addition to the growers, the micro businesses, the retailers, processors, compliance facility, and transporters, there is a consumption lounge. There are, and I'm not saying the correct terms for these, but there is a special consumption event. And then
And
there,
that's a festival. and I've heard that
Mhm.
too.
And then
where
you
they
can
a
have-
Special license for that.
correct. So that's
Yes.
another one. And then you can have another license. So you need an event organizer, and then you need a event supplier.
So that's like as if you were gonna have a great big beer tent somewhere, this would be a big.
Or a perfect
marijuana.
example is actually hash bash going through the proper steps should be a completely legitimized event.
Mhm.
I get it, but you know, what's, well, okay, so my point is, if you have these licenses, they're not in this ordinance.
I know, I see your forecasting,
Yeah.
and if this is on the cusp of being the next point of topic,
Well,
let's hold
I'm
it in
throwing it
now.
out there. I'm saying it wasn't present, it's not, it exists, but
Mhm.
it's not in this ordinance. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and I think that when we come back around, I think maybe let's look at what we have before us, and then at the next time when Denise is available, because
Okay.
even if we don't want to go that way, I think the conversation still needs to be had while we're having the big picture
Well, I
conversation.
think we all need to be very much educated as to what are the licenses out there.
So you're saying there's 4 more licenses besides the 6 we have here?
I want to say that's.
I mean, I don't know.
There's three,
This
there's 3 or
first time I've
4.
heard of these,
There's 3 or 4 and they all
And I've heard
surround the
about-
consumption of it.
Okay,
I didn't hear about the cafe, but I'd heard about the festival. and
So yeah, you can do temporary licenses for festivals, temporary retailer licenses that have to meet up with the temporary festivals to supply it. And then a consumption lounge. And a lot of this, they just had, I think, their second statewide festival that was downstate that they did this for. But consumption lounges in municipalities, those are a little trickier. So not a lot, it's not everywhere yet. They have about 50 of them hopefully coming into Detroit, but the business model for them is that you cannot sell food, drink, anything at these consumption lounges as it's written right now. So there's not a big push for businesses to go into them. So they're trying to figure that out at the legislation, how they can make this something profitable where businesses would want to open it up. They do have one in Ann Arbor that's attached to, I don't want to say it because I'm going to get the name wrong. Well, what they're trying to do is if you purchase marijuana through them, you get a ticket that you can then take to their consumption lounge on a roof in the next door building and consume up there. So it's relatively new and not a ton are doing it right now. So I'm kind of like where you all are. I need to know more.
Well, I just wanted to make a heads up because, you
Okay.
know,
We need
you
that.
open the door, you're opening the door.
Mhm.
You need to know.
Regulations for all this too?
Yes, what can and cannot be consumed there. It has to be retail flower. People can't just bring their own product from home to smoke in here. It has to be legally purchased.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just like a bar.
kind of like a bar?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and I threw out there last time that, you know, if it's commercial, so why are we limiting? Which I have that thought, but the state does say you can limit. So that's the reason why I threw it out there. The state allows us to limit if we choose to, but we don't have to. So that's one of the things the state does give you as an.
Oh, yeah, well, the
Township.
state definitely tries to put as much
Yeah.
emphasis on local municipalities to really have the governing aspect of, because they have such a tight reign of control through Lara and the licensing process to start
Mhm.
that the municipality has to have some ability to.
So the reason why I throw that out there is because when we start talking about the different areas that we could put it in, you'd want to think about those areas and like how, what they look like, what is the potential of commercial uses, and would they be bought for this purpose? You know what I mean? Would they be refurbished in our minds, or would we be looking at knocking down stuff, or maybe there's even, we don't have a lot of open space in the areas we're talking about. It's mostly buildings that exist.
Well, and that's what we're talking about today is
Right.
what zones we're in a lot of these in.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's why I wanted to bring up the idea, would it just be, it's commercial, you can do it, or are we gonna limit it and then try to figure out, well, what if we got more, would we open it up? I don't know, it's just, that's a conversation I think we have to have.
I would concur. I think that every conversation at this point is a good conversation.
And you're gonna make note of that, of these 4 different,
Yep, I already have it.
and so then hopefully Denise reads that and she does, or we will make sure she is aware of that and she'll find out some more stuff.
And
some
I'm
more
sure it's probably
information too.
No fault of Denise's, it is such a new
Yeah, no, yeah,
thing,
we're not,
and the business model, as Mr. Courier stated, is such a farce right now
Yeah.
that nobody wants to jump into it because why have a licensure that you can't use? There's no other methodology, especially in the community thus far, having nothing purchased. So
well, it's,
but it's on the horizon.
it's way, from the initial, what we voted on to what we have today, it's way, more regulated and, you know, you, at least you understand what you're getting into. 2 or 3 years ago, we didn't even want to wade into this pond yet, but
I mean, I read it looks like all of them are gonna require special use.
Yeah,
And then that was in the document as to the special use and all the different things you need to look at when you're looking at these different districts. Not knowing what I'm looking at, I'm having a problem with how they went about saying all those things and what you should be doing when it comes to the special use.
our ordinance is very close to the cities. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't know, did Denise write the cities or I don't know? but
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
And we're trying to, we don't want to have, you know, mark change. Normally in our zoning, we don't want to have mark change between the city and the township, so, yeah. Okay, I guess questions I had on uses, I had, why did we, does anybody remember why we won't allow it in B1? Just because it might border residential, is that? Or I mean, I don't know that, because we're not allowing anything in B1.
Well, and I had notes, so I guess until we confirm
Yeah.
our presenter, maybe that's something, because I had some notes looking at other municipalities, and I wanted to kind of ask this commission as well, is especially looking at section 714 or 417. How it is all laid out. I understand the marijuana grower licensures of, A, B, and C, which represents numerically 500 plants, 1,000 plants, or 1,500, being restricted to agricultural, forest rec, and the potentials of M1 and M2. But with that being said, I think that consideration has to be given, especially within our climate. The majority of grows that would happen here, the vast majority, because this is a business to maximize their profit margins, are going to be indoor grows. These aren't,
Right.
we're a zone 4 or 5. We're not going to be having outdoor operations. So, and these are just my notes that I've already shared with Denise. But given that consideration of growing licensures aren't going to be the typical farm fields at this point, until some other hybrids come out that can handle our weather conditions. But my considerations for just this schedule of special use is for the grower licenses A, B, and C, that consideration be given to the potentials of B2 and B3, because although we don't have a ton of existing buildings, there are a lot of empty buildings that are still in our community that would fit that. And if it's all special use, it's always going to be coming to this. Every scenario is going to be a little different. So those were in terms of the grower licenses. The B2 and B3 are in my notes for consideration. If you want to go down to micro businesses, in my notes, I'm looking because the reason that the state threw this micro business out there is to hopefully give the local smaller individuals the opportunity to compete against big corporations, really bigger money pools. So with the micro business, I actually had my notes, special use from R3 across to forest rec. And then obviously you already had it in M1 and M2. But this is an all around one-stop shop. So R3 obviously is on that cusp of residential. But there's already in our community a plethora of businesses intermingled, and that actually is the definition of a community business is an R3 zone. Moving down to provisioning centers. To me, there again, I guess the only change and note that I had to myself with the provisioning center was the potential of B1. And having it in B2 and B3. Then moving further down the list to processor. I thought it would behoove the conversation to look at the utilization of special use in B2 and B3 as well. And the reason I state that is with the processing, especially with depending on to which extent that they're processing and potentially making derivatives, tinctures, et cetera, gummies, whatever, edibles. There are some processes that demand that style of activity have internal fire suppression. So when you start looking at internal fire suppression, that means by state code, you actually have to be on infrastructure. You cannot have internal fire suppression based on a wellhead. So if we're ever gonna be realistic, obviously it fits in M1 and M2 because in some of our M1 and M2 zones, which were extremely limited within our municipality, those zones have existing, for the most part, have existing water infrastructure. So I had put the processing special use into B2 and B3 for that reason. Then moving down further to the safety compliance facilities. This is honestly would be no different than any other scientific lab or business. You wouldn't know there's not cannabis coming and going. It's smaller increments strictly for testing. And for that reason, I put notes of special use that included office space B1 and B2. Because it's the same as any other small business. I mean, you could have it right next to a title company and there's no difference. Then moving to the last of the transporter. There again, these transporters are starting at a point of origin, picking up a product and delivering it by a pre-designed route by the state of Michigan to their location. And there's no reason that just the businesses of transportation, because nothing's stored at a transportation facility. It is trucks coming in, trucks coming out, and nothing's held there. And for that reason, I gave consideration to office space, B1 and B2, as well as B3 and M1 and M2 that you had put in your previous notes from the last meeting. Those were just the notes that I had because there's certain functions that, that the processor, if you didn't know that they had to have internal suppression, then it would have made sense to say, let's put you out just in an M1 or an M2 or out in ag or whatever, but they actually in those facilities would need infrastructure. And there again, when you're processing, you can't have any smoked product. Everything is so regimented. So those were just my notes. I know that Mr. Courier's gone through the process and they are more familiar, but I guess that those were just my notes because there are certain functions that need consideration, like the fire suppression potentials when it comes to processing, but the growing as well. These functions, when you go next time to Grand Rapids and you're going through the S curves that were always a dilapidated part of town, all those warehouses as of today, tens and hundreds of thousands of square foot, are all gross. So that being said, I thought I understood the methodology to get to the first notes. But I think that there are certain things, given the consideration that these aren't permitted uses, these are still, no matter what, special use. Every case is still going to come before this commission for that final decision. I think that instead of pigeonholing ourselves, thinking this is only where we want it, it's already here. So how do we use our infrastructure? How do we use available structures that are unfilled? And how does it fit in that realm of conversation when we're looking at not really breaking the essence of each zone, but enhancing it under this business model? So those were just my quick notes in terms of the special use capability.
What were your thoughts on Denise's on page 4 of 9?
Yeah, she had.
She has some thoughts on that.
This table is example of typical districts, the uses could be allowed in. For reference, the city of Alpena allows the following. And she's got growers.
Yeah.
And I1, I2, processors, I1, I2, safety compliance, and she listed all the ones that would be typical in their ordinance.
Yeah.
And like I said at the last meeting, although it's not in the township, like there's places like Ripley Street Station that just sits there, and you know, there's a lot of buildings that just sit empty. Neiman's is empty, right? I mean, I don't know.
They're not empty. They're being filled up with the furniture from Young's.
Oh, are they? Okay.
Yeah.
But not Ripley
I mean,
Street
it's
Station.
not a very good.
Yeah.
Well, and yeah, I mean, and I spoke with Mayor Walagora this afternoon as well. And he's interested as to where this commission stands, because as we know, they started quite some time ago and only being focused on the medical aspect. And I think that this commission's at least seeing the reality of where we stand today and knowing what every business is seeing. Every conversation I've had with any business owner, they won't even consider going into a community to start a medical. There's just no, now with the recreational, they want to have that because there's also different tax procedures between the medical and the recreational. But as a business owner, if recreational is not on the table, there's really not much need for them to go in and try to establish themselves in a medical area.
Because Roger City, they said if they would start over again, they would not have done medical.
Yeah.
That's what she told me. But I think they started as medical.
Well, and I think inherently, because this is still to some a very faux pas topic to discuss, I think that was the mechanism that they took to get their foot in the door, to prove to a community that this isn't as bad as it is. And then once recreational was legalized, obviously everybody's going to hop on recreational because now you're actually expanding your business and your market 90% right out the gate, because I think it's 1 in 10 purchasers of cannabis in the state are medical prescribed users. So when you're looking at those kind of ratios and you're trying to start a business, if you're chasing 10%, you're losing 90%. I mean, it's just not a sustainable business model. So I think that there's a lot of proper overlap with Denise's aspects of looking at the city in conjunction.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have any problem with that, but she points out, like in our OS district, is adjacent to residential. So you might not want to consider allowing them in that district because there's a lot of residential.
Well, yeah, and if we really want to talk about the smallest zone in our township, it's office space.
Right.
So we're talking about 2 or 3 parcels on the northeast quadrant, Hamilton Road and 23. We have 1 barely 2-acre parcel on the corner at the intersection of Long Rapids Road and Genshaw. And outside of that, office space in our community, in our township, is nearly non-existent. So no matter, I guess that's always the point of, and the fluid conversation, no matter how we look at keeping it separate from places, we're only gonna potentially, if we look at it only with those blinders on, we're gonna lose the bigger picture. Now, obviously, when in my infancy, I wasn't ever going to give any consideration to R2, R1, or waterfront residential. Because inherently you're getting away from any business. Now, I think you're gonna have some kickback with potentially R1 and R2. And potentially even waterfront residential when it comes to the micro business license, because I think that there's gonna be, I know that there's 2 individuals in our community that would like to start a micro business in their residential neighborhood.
Would that be under the idea of in, what do you call that? Where you can have a home business in your own house?
Pretty much under that same guise as home occupation. And so where in that, how much, given the fact that the state
Well, what I'm saying is, do you
created
even
that,
have to allow it?
you don't ever have to.
Because like if it's a home-based commercial use, it's 1/3 of your house, that's home. I mean, that's like, I mean, I don't know, do you have to tell anybody what you're doing? It's like you're babysitting for kids, you've got a little, if it's legal,
Yeah.
that's my whole point. If it's illegal, obviously it's a problem, but if it's legal and you are doing that and it's wholly inside your home and it's a home-based business that you know what I'm talking about, like, is that something you have to address?
Well, I think so, but at the
I
same
mean, it's
time,
like you're saying we could zone it that way. I'm saying, why do that? Because then it opens it up to a bigger idea.
So don't we have?
Well, yeah, we don't have, but no, I see it,
We have
but
B1, but we don't even have any.
That's what I thought. That's why it's
Yeah.
not being addressed.
But we should
Exactly.
still address it, but we don't have it in our township.
so
But we kept it, just in case we.
But
find
also
a
she
place
talks
to have
about
it.
the overlay, which has been a big deal, I think, for our
Mhm.
trying to get US 23 South mostly, having that overlay.
well, I know that the overlay has been extremely effective on a separate topic of cleaning up nonconformities.
Right.
The biggest hurdle that I found, and it's not a hurdle, is just me typing a lot of letters upon sale. Oftentimes now with the B or the overlay, the B2 overlay zones in our primary corridors, real estate agents, insurance agents are perplexed. So I've had to write a plethora of letters upon sale that if your residential that's now in this B2 overlay was to burn down, you can still rebuild the residential aspect. It was just, so I've been sending out those letters pretty routinely. And I'm actually following that up where I talked with a couple real estate agents in our community, and I'm thinking I'm putting together a workshop that I'll have for zoning questions to all realtors and get them familiarized with ordinance 142. Because I've taught a lot of realtors in our community how to give them fish, but I've also been teaching them how to fish and driving them back to our ordinance so that they can answer their own questions. So
The new ordinance is more sophisticated than what they had.
I think it's a splendid document.
So it's like, well, I don't have any problem with what she's saying, there, but I don't think it's, might be a moot point.
Yeah, well, and so another thing that the reality of where we're at today is we already have somewhat similar scenarios to the micro business in all of our residential areas right now. And we have no authority to zoning, and that is caregivers. People have the right to grow cannabis now. Everybody's neighbor could be growing it. And most are, surprisingly. Unbeknownst to myself, talking to a 80-year-old neighbor of mine, he likes cannabis tea. Good for him. But so it's trying to wallow through and make, I guess, when I look to anytime we're talking about permitted versus special use, we have to always be cognizant of the fact that no matter how we look at, and I think we're always in agreement that no matter what the licensure, whatever the zone, it's always a special use because it's going to be a case by case scenario. And, you know, maybe they're in an OS, but on the fringes of a residential, but there's like 3 daycares right in the immediate vicinity. Is that going to sway a decision? Obviously, there has to be a case by case scenario.
Well, in here though, that if you're gonna, there is some detailing on that
Oh yeah.
with how far it can be from certain things.
Oh yeah. Well, and that was Greg's parting contribution to the cities, was how and where to limit. And I think that's no matter what, you can define certain known areas.
She's got it on page 8,
Yep.
9, number 14. Separation distances.
Yeah, and that really, the 500 feet, when it comes to educational buildings, is already a standard by state law. Religious facilities, I actually find that hilarious because it's Alpena, and so kitty corner from every church is a church that pours it by the pint. So a church that pours truth by the pint, otherwise known as a bar. So obviously there's always those considerations. But when you start putting 1,000-foot plus parameters, you start running out of some potential space. But don't get me wrong, I think that there has to be some due diligence done to keeping away from schools, primary avenues that are solely children. That's makes perfect sense.
I like the way that number 14 is written. Did you? Because it talks about that it's also called an eligible building, meaning that sometimes you can waive these different things if you comply or go through A through E.
Yep.
Which has to do with objections of neighbors and things like that.
Which is inherently always going to be part of every single licenses process of special use.
The
But
thing about special use and people just not liking it, that doesn't always go over.
yeah,
Because just because you don't like it doesn't mean, okay, it's done. That's not how that works.
well, that's not how it works, but I'm
But
saying
this
in
is a little
turn,
more specific.
oh, this is very specific. Yeah, and I agree with having, the 500 foot of certain things. Now, do you go saying for any buildings used for residential education and religious childcare, park, or addiction
See,
treatment
like a park,
purposes?
I mean, you have to be 500.
That
feet from a
is,
park. I mean,
this
that's-
is the city's language. This is what they have in theirs.
I guess it depends on the park. If it's a park that's never used. You know you know what I mean?
And I don't get the park, because maybe on a sunny day, there might be a child playing. I mean,
Well, no, if you take the parks, along Lake Huron, those are heavily used with children and stuff. You wouldn't want somebody sitting around smoking dope.
but there again, tell me how many of those parks are in the township?
Oh, that.
There's only one nature preserve, and that's 133 acres on Misery Bay.
Okay. And the one that was closed down. It's the state one that, they wanted to.
Oh, yeah, Frog Road. That's MDNR property. Yes, and it's still at the tip of South Partridge Point Road.
Yeah.
Yep, still there.
I don't know. I think that's what I'm saying. If we read these things.
Yep.
May I I think it's kind of open enough, but yet specific too. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
if you waiver this because it's kind of an eligible building, if we were 400 feet instead of 500, would that still be okay?
Yeah.
There's, on M32, there's just up from Meyer, there's a church. It's the old snowmobile place, but now it's a church, so 500 foot in all directions from that is eliminating a lot of,
Well, exactly.
because we have that little industrial park.
Yep,
which
behind
is
it.
Probably 5, and then we have it across the road from it too.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is
So with that,
500 would be a good thing, but to etch it in stone, like all will have to be 500.
Yeah,
that's not
well,
good.
and there's already a ZBA case that's going up in Presqu'île to Rogers City for that exact same thing. And I think they had 500 foot in concrete, and they had a neighbor at 490. It was just a ridiculous, it was almost there. And so they actually had to kill that and go back to an amendment to try to ask for an variance. So I like how she put in the eligible building, because
Yes.
that gives a creative way to say, okay, this isn't the only mechanism. How can you refute not allowing it? So I do like the eligible buildings aspect to that, by all means.
But I like, go ahead.
You know, just one thing about this, this is a new industry that we have zero, none.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we can kind of taper this and bring it in. Maybe we have to bring in part of it and then bring in some down the road. The other part of it is people always complain about too many bars.
Right.
Well, they've been here and whatever. We have a control over that at this point with what this new potential business. So I think to put one on every corner or be eligible to be on any corner, I don't think that's something we want to look at.
Maybe
But
beginning. you're right.
Well,
yeah, we're at the beginning, so we want to,
but I would also throw a flag of caution to how are you going to control that mechanism? Because that is a conversation that is a slippery slope of what are the controls, what is the testing mechanism, and how are you going to make those determinations? Because the last time I was present, at least at that point in time, the conversation was steered more towards free market and let the market sort itself out, which is the safest way to go about things.
There is that, it's just that, and I brought that up,
Yeah.
but I still also brought up tonight that the state supersedes anything, and they are saying we can do that. And I don't know where I stand on it, but I'm saying there is that.
What?
The state's saying that. The state's giving the township that right.
Yeah.
And that's what you fall back on. You don't say we made that up. The state
No,
says we
by no means. I understand that, but my point to that, and that is a level of control that we as a municipality have. My concern is, how are we going to define it? Is it because that inherently opens up the potential Pandora's box of disagreements? So I'm not opposed to it. I'm just saying, if you go that route, then you actually have a lot more work ahead of you to saying, how is it going to be first come, first serve? Or is it going to be by test, a point system?
Well, these aren't gonna pop up on every corner because they're,
Oh, yeah.
if you just saw what the security system and just that little place in Roger City. I mean, you're gonna have some money if you're gonna, because the state's not gonna just like take an old gas station and the next day you put a sign up, well, no.
When Laura mandates anybody that's tied to these licensures have, I believe, still $100,000 cash. I think per. Oh, so yeah, so
So I mean,
300.
these aren't just gonna pop up everywhere.
These aren't going to pop up. And that was the tip of the hat by the state to entertain the micro business, because instead of having $300,000 for each licensure, this is a potential where somebody could have only 300,000
300,000 for what?
cash reserve to even apply for the license.
Because I mean, I'm not being, like, if I compared the Roger City one, because driving by it, it looks like a jail, little jail, it's ugly. And then but you go some other place, like, well, even Kalkaska, there's this one, I think it's Luma, and it's really nice. You know, it's really modern looking.
And there's a nice one up in Mackinac
I'm just
City.
using those as comparisons, so I'm thinking 300,000 reserve, I'm surprised.
But even in Roger City, they got 18 cameras and they
So
got
they got more than that.
safes and it's,
You go by Frank's D and lot, they've got cameras all the way
Yeah.
around.
I do
The
like,
old Frank's.
I do like the revitalization.
It's so they need to show for each license, you need a different capital investment to show that you have on the ready. I think it's 25% of that has to be liquid, and the other 75% has to be tied up in some type of building asset that can eventually be turned into liquid. So the thing I wanted to touch on, I don't know if this would help at all, but as far as limiting the licenses, what a lot of the municipalities see when they get into issues with litigation is when they try to limit licenses and do it on a merit-based system and some type of license lottery system. They did this in Grand Rapids, and they're still going through litigation for it. And what the municipalities have found is the best way to navigate that and have still full control on how many they allow in is through zoning. That is the best way to determine how many you want in here without having it be a competitive licensing process.
But that's tricky.
It's tricky.
Because even I find this, when we use the idea of a special use, well, you know, once you allow one in, the second one compares itself to that one. And it's gonna have to be a really good reasoning, like really sound reasoning why you'd say no. Do you know what I'm saying? Because special use sounds, but it sounds great,
Yeah.
but it's kind of like the widget guy. I mean, as soon as he got that going, then it's like, I want the whole mall, and like, I'm happy for it, but I'm just saying, kind of hard to turn it down in a way if you truly wanted to.
And I think the micro businesses might be a hard sell in residential, but
I think it
even though
will
they're
be.
happening right now, but they're not.
I think it will be, but there again, I mean.
But I guess if we
special
wanted,
use is always a pickle beast.
yeah,
I feel like if somebody's gonna do it in their house, that's a home business. That's allowed in the ordinance through.
But
Special,
there's other parts of the micro business that go above and beyond just.
Because of what, the smell and all that kind of stuff.
With
Everything's.
So that's why you'd want it, because the state regulates it so that somebody can't just do it out of their house.
correct. And when you have a processing facility, that's when you have the CO2, the ethanol, and it can be in residential areas.
I don't really want to see businesses going on in residential. That's not. Because you can't control the neighbor situation, the kids and all this stuff. I mean, I just think that's. You can do that.
Walking my children down Greenwood.
But I think you can legally, can't you legally grow marijuana as a person? Yeah.
yeah, well, so many plants.
So why would you need to put
Well, I think-
micros in those residential homes?
And the only reason I brought it up is because I know that there's two longstanding Alpena residences that would like to, and that's it.
I
You
know,
mean, would like to make it
but
legal.
I'd like to,
No, they would like the micro business in residential areas.
Well, they're probably doing it now.
I know, but like some people would like to put a restaurant in a residential area too. I mean, it's like,
Well, and that's why we're
you
here.
know what, you know?
And
Yeah.
the state, I get it. And special uses can be a slippery slope. But we're talking about probably out of 100 people that start the application process, I don't know what the ratio is of successful applicants. It's very small to meet all the criteria. So
That's
I'm
how
not
you-
opposed. I mean, the essence of an R1 waterfront residential isn't where you want to have business. But I told these two individuals that I would
Yeah.
speak on their behalf of saying that they would like the potentials of having the opportunity to go to special use for that potential.
But 150, you're allowed up to 150 plants. That's not a little,
That's not legal.
that's a lot of area to, I mean, those plants are big.
They can be.
Well, yeah, I guess, but
There's
150 plants.
so many different.
could you
know
grow
what's-
150 plants
You
in
can do
this room?
150 plants probably in this room.
In this room, okay.
So that means he's gonna put a pole barn up, or they are.
Do you know how many people are already pulling home permits to put up pole barns and right now, I think unfortunately, as we're seeing in some of our outlying townships, Wellington, illegal growth. And it's because they haven't gone through the zoning, so this is the control, I guess, long and short, as Mr. Berger says. If we want to have a potentially successful new niche business come into our community, then it all starts here, and having open conversation as we all have for a few months now. is really how you weed out all the kinks and address everything. I mean, for all intent and purpose, I mean, do you want to go through this entire document? Because right now I'm still waiting of why they're not locking on. And I haven't seen anybody pop on yet, so.
I had basically the same questions. I didn't have the question, I didn't question R3 or office services, but I questioned B1, but we don't even have B1, but evidently we plan on having it, because we still kept it in the ordinance. But I didn't know why we wouldn't allow the facilities under special use in B1 areas. Most of these. I didn't have processor, but I don't know why I didn't have processor included.
Well, there's two ways of looking at that, Tom, too. Since we don't have it, until we do have it, you could add it or say, yeah, we don't need it.
I think that's why we kind of left it in there, is which direction are you gonna go after ordinance 142? Are you gonna push for a B1 development?
Probably not, in the sense that US 23 South is B2 on up. It's not, we don't have B1. We could have put it in there if we wanted, but we have the overlay. So.
We have the overlay, which kind of cleaned it up, and thus far, it's been working splendidly for my city,
That's good.
except for all the weather. That's worked out.
Okay, so how, are we still gonna think about this some more about the uses and areas, or? So what did you have for processor? You had all the zones, office services Is that-
For the
for
processor?
processor?
For the processor, I had only put it into B2 and B3.
Okay,
You added it.
Yeah, and my notes.
She's got M1 and M2,
Yep,
and you added B2 and B3.
yeah.
Oh.
I don't have a problem
I
with
don't
that,
have a
but,
problem with
yeah.
that.
And then B1, whatever, we don't have any, but whenever we get some, we could,
I mean,
we
I
can,
populated B1.
we can
for
modify
microbusiness.
our
Yeah.
ordinance too, but.
Yeah, I mean, the micro business is kind of the biggest, so again, for a marijuana grower, first ballot, I added B2 and B3. Then heading down to micro business, added special use from R3 to B1, and then agricultural and forest rec on top of just B2, B3, M1 and M2.
Wait a minute. I'm looking at the chart.
Yep.
You're starting with the marijuana grower.
Grower,
Okay.
my notes, I added B2 and B3.
Okay.
Moving down to micro business, I added R3, OS, B1, agriculture, forest rec. Provisioning center. The only thing I added to this was B1, which doesn't exist. And it needs to be, and thankfully it's in B2, B3, M1, and M2, because that specifically would take fire suppression, which has to be on infrastructure. And then moving down to safety compliance. That one, to be honest, you could probably take that one from R3 all the way across the board, because that is a science lab. That is nothing more. There is minuscule amounts of cannabis coming in. They test that product for state certification, and that's it. I think all the testing mechanisms are all by gram increments. So it's very small bits of cannabis. So cannabis, the safety compliance facility, office space, B1, B2 I added to my notes, and then the secure transporter, office space, B1, B2 I added. Is there again? This is a facility where there's secure transport. They go to location A, pick up product, navigate exactly how Laura tells them to get there, drops off product, and returns. And I don't, and you may know, a point of clarification is, with the transporter, they can't from what I know, they cannot transport cannabis and cash in the same haul. They actually have to drop cannabis to pick up cash and do that completely separate. Or
They can do it together.
Okay. so they can do it.
But there is a kind of.
Yeah, so when I did my site visit, that's the only reason, I thought they had to be separate. But when I was at Rocket City, he literally hopped on the new mechanism, I forget what the name is for the state federal software platform that they use through Lara. But he's like, okay, here's an order, and he clicked on that order. And he says, my driver's name's Todd. Right now, he's been sitting at this intersection for 40 seconds. And if he deviates from this course, red flags start going. To the point where they had, this is kind of new to even the transporters, where there was road construction. And Lara was saying, you have to go this direction. He had to turn around and go back, because if he would have deviated, it could have messed up even more stuff. So I can't stress how many layers of regulation there is at the state. But those are my notes, just in terms of the table of permitted special use. I don't disagree with you one iota, Mr. Rich. Special use can be a slippery slope. That's why I want us to do all the work prior to having the first special use come here, because then you already have your answers. And whether that's X amount of each licensure, or you narrow that down just to provisioning centers, which I think everybody kind of has in their head, and until you see it grow, or until you see any of these other scientific labs, because even the grows are labs. I mean, this is strict. I mean, you're coming in, you're gonna take off your shoes or have a sticky mat, you're gonna wash your hands, you're gonna put on a white jumpsuit, because they don't want any contaminations getting into a sterile environment for all that. So.
Well, in this ordinance, she's talking about the general standards and submission requirements. So it talks about site plan.
Question. Who does
Yeah.
all the compliance? Who
Yeah,
follows
like
up
this
to make
business
sure everything's
plan and all
done?
that stuff.
Who does all this?
State.
What does the township have to do?
Township has to, this is always where it falls onto each municipality. This is where the state said, you can charge up to $5,000 annually for inspection. And so what the inspection slip that I saw at Roger City is some generic questions. When was the last time the state asked for this? Are you in compliance with this? Have generic. I mean, really, it would come down to if a case came before this commission for special use for, say, a dispensary, and this commission put any stipulations on that activity, then the enforcement agent, zoning administrator, whoever it turns out to be through the township, goes and ensures that those stipulations are being honored. And then you can add any other aspects to that, but there's not a lot that isn't already kind of under the thumb of the state. So.
Again, if you look under section 743,
Yep.
number 3, there's a list of the following shall be submitted in conjunction with the licensing application from the state. This is what was added by the city as for more detail. What I'm concerned with is a pre-qualification. The growers shall provide the following, the plans, the wastewater mildew. Who does all that? You?
Well,
The building
wastewater,
inspector?
There's, yeah, so wastewater. Now we're talking about the potentials of growth that are on infrastructure. Water in, chemicals out,
But-
same as any other restaurant.
No, I get that, but I'm saying there's a list of things that have to be looked at Who's doing that? You,
That would probably be the zoning.
Well, and the product would, if it got moldy, the product would be no good.
I understand
Yeah,
that,
they'd
but
have
there's
to-
somebody that's gonna have to look at all this. Who's that person?
Well, it's not us because,
That's what
I
I'm
mean, the
trying to-
market will, if it's a bad product.
No,
It's
no,
just-
this, no, this is different than what you're saying. This is like, there's going to be somebody in the township that will be responsible for the site plans, Article 5 through 6, Article 6. Then there's gonna be proof of ownership. Somebody looks at that. Somebody looks at proof of pre-qualification, growers. The growers shall provide the following: cultivation plans, wastewater plan, mold mildew plan, air quality plan, mechanical plan, electrical plan.
The zoning
Who's
administrator.
zoning administrator for all this? Okay, then we get to the business plan. Who's gonna look at that?
Zoning administrator.
Okay.
Till we
so
hire somebody
now-
else.
Now we get to the standards. Now we get to the standards, because you got a security plan and economic impact information. That's a lot of work on you guys. So now we're under the standards. The standards to me are like what we would use if we were looking at special use. Like exterior signage, hours of operation, indoor operation, consumption on premises, odors, artificial lighting. That's all special
So,
use.
standards. We already have somebody that does all this, just not in cannabis. His name's Rick Newell.
Right, so
So if it's.
so our
subdivision
plan-
ordinance
so-
142, some of this would actually be part of his.
So when we do special use, will it be under our special use? Where we have in our zoning right now, what we say for regulations of what you have to look at? Or will we add these standards to a specific, to this ordinance, so it'll be over and above?
I think you have to go over.
Okay. So that's what, we need to look at that.
You'd make approval and then based on following all these
I get it, but we don't have all this necessarily under our regular special use in our zoning ordinance. You see what I'm saying?
But we can list anything we want under special use.
But this
Or
is
I
a separate
guess not
ordinance.
anything we
This
want,
is
but-
separate. This is a separate ordinance. Right?
No, this would be.
Yeah, but you can,
Two
you can
ordinance
still
142.
cite, you can still
It
cite
would
these
be
articles
separate, but it would be
approving
a-
special use based on
Okay.
these articles.
Well, right, but there's two, then there's gonna be two standards of special use. I wanted to get this straight. Because the special use that we have within our bigger ordinance is for everything. This is gonna be more specific because it's a separate ordinance and it's gonna be an amendment. But with that amendment, you then have to look at this too. You see what I'm saying? Does it supersede our ordinance one? Does this supersede that? Like, this would be more specific when we have a marijuana special use.
So I guess what would it be superseding?
It'd be
Because-
superseding the one that exists in our zoning ordinance
By
Because-
special use.
Right,
by special use.
But you're comparing apples and oranges. It's a special use,
Yes.
but this is site specific to cannabis related activity.
this
So
isn't
it
cars,
is-
this is cannabis.
So it's.
I get it.
Yeah, so I
I
mean,
get an
yeah.
ordinance more than, it's a commercial business,
Yeah,
but it's cannabis. And with cannabis, the state has brought a more specific way of handling it
Yeah.
here.
All these things. Yeah.
So what I'm saying, I don't know if this, okay, growth and cultivation of marijuana outdoors permitted. That's not their special use in our regular ordinance. That's a specific to the marijuana.
I'm following.
Okay, you're following me. Okay.
I'm with you.
So these are important, is what I'm trying to tell you. It's a little bit more than what's in the ordinance itself, and we have to read that through, and you have to understand that you're gonna be looking at this. Like marijuana plants must be surrounded by an approved opaque fence. That's not in the regular ordinance. This is specific to this one.
And-
So the special use is gonna have to be based on this
Special-
ordinance,
Based on. for
these
all.
requirements.
Now you're extending the special use for cannabis into the existing special use for our zone.
Well, are you gonna do it? And that's what I'm trying to find out. Are you gonna add this to our special use in our ordinance if it pertains to cannabis? These will be extra things to look at.
That's how
Under
she has
special
this
use.
laid out.
Okay, because that's what I wasn't sure how this was. If that's how she was
That's
doing
how
it.
I read it. Is this is
So-
going to be a rider and further clarification by state standards.
Yeah.
That she's folded.
So
in.
this is extra special use for marijuana stuff. Okay,
Yes.
I want that clear, you know, because special use is,
Yeah,
this is different, a little bit more, a little more,
oh, it's thorough.
yeah, more thorough.
Yeah. This is, now, the same argument could be had out of prohibition if we would have been coming into the re-legalization of alcohol.
Yeah.
We'd be having the same conversation about zoning and special use. But now it's cannabis. So it's thorough as it has to be, because you have to, even though the state gives us such a luxury of making minuscule changes.
But it's
to their
important that we
laundry
read,
list,
we read
this
this
is
through.
their laundry list that
Right.
we would have to identify by special.
So we have to agree on all this. I mean, that's over and above a normal special
Yeah.
use.
Okay, so what parts wouldn't we agree with, I guess?
I don't know,
Yeah.
I haven't read it through.
Oh,
I've
okay.
read it myself personally. I think it's all encompassing pretty much, but
Yeah.
I mean, I just want to make sure everybody knows that these
I
are the
mean-
kinds of things you have to look at on top of it.
Not knowing much about the business side, I couldn't
Exactly.
disagree with much of this. I'm assuming, and hopefully rightly so, that this would at least meet the state standards or be stricter than,
This is actually stricter
okay,
than the state standards.
and we have that,
It should
we have
be,
the right to
because
do that,
is
so.
the envelope that we as a municipality have, is that thin little layer that separates the state from businesses. What additional things do we want as a municipality that the state hasn't identified? And you can put that upon the applicants. But this is an extremely comprehensive zoning mechanism for special use to cannabis. So I've gone through it a couple times, and outside of, I haven't seen too much that jumps off the page that is different, or there's nothing on here that's less than what the state mandates. There's some that are equal to, but that's where every community is a little different.
Back to,
Eligible, sorry.
back to enforcement. So you come up with all these, whatever, rules, regulations, and everything, but who does all the enforcement? Is it pretty well done by the state?
The vast majority is done by the state, but if, as, say, the zoning administrator goes and says, you know, you're deficient in 13B. We file that, that goes to the state state's probably gonna come right behind and say, do they give you one kick to the shin before they pull the license? They don't give a lot of flexibility. No, I mean.
Take the license, that kick your shit.
Yeah, say, oops, you just missed a trailer hitch. Yeah. So there's to that, I mean.
Back
the
to
state-
enforcement, somebody's still got to be doing these things. So is this going to require, if we're talking about all these different places, then potentially we could end up with 6, 8, 10 businesses or more in our community.
Yeah,
So there has to be somebody that's almost a dedicated person to
And that
overseeing
may be a
this.
discussion that takes place, and that way, you know what, you have, let's say you had 10 businesses.
so that's $50,000.
You have up to the potential on your annual inspection fee to have $50,000. That would support the potential of somebody being hired.
Yeah.
These are, this is a mechanism that could actually create jobs in the township for the enforcement, and it could actually go above and beyond just, I would like to take up a couple hats that I wear on a routine basis. I don't think my wife will mind the pay cut. But, I mean, there's gonna be a need for just that. There might be, hey, you know what? I'm throwing in the towel, we need to hire somebody. This is becoming
Yeah,
too much of a burden for
Well,
one
that's
person.
what
But I
I
mean,
think.
we're already there. I'm.
But we need to know that upfront, back to planning, like we're talking about in another department, we have that. We say, oh my gosh, we're gonna need somebody to do this. Well, we need to know that upfront, that we're gonna have,
Well,
that we gotta make sure the fees are coming in to compensate for this person or
It
persons
would
that's gotta be
actually
done.
run very, very much like that in the building department. Permit fees paid that salary. That's state law. So it'd be just another potential mechanism there. You have that capture. Because outside of the $5,000 of potential for inspection, there's only 2 of the licenses out of 6, the micro business and the provisioning center, that have now the $28,000 state tax reimbursement to each municipality that allows one of those licenses. So if you said you put a cap on provisioning centers at 5, I mean, that's nearly $150,000 collected. And then you can add the $5,000 per licensure. And it's not about, I mean, that's gonna be a self-sustaining prophecy for the potentials of a job created here at the township. But it would be solely funded right through there. Yeah, right now, sky's the limit. We might have to hire 2 people. Might be able to do it just right now and keep all the hats on, and I'm still doing the zoning administrator. But these are all things that, how are you gonna, if you're gonna say yes to A, B, and C, then you can also say it's our recommendation that the capture of these monies would be utilized for the creation of a job position to do the inspections. I mean, this is all open for discussion.
We just approve it, Norm. You guys on the board of trustees who get paid the big bucks, you figure out how to
Not a problem.
administer it.
This is your problem when it comes to you.
They'll say, we don't know. Norm voted yes.
We're just suggesting you might want to do this. That's up
But
to
I
you.
think the big thing is there's the dollar signs that are, they're just floating out there like crazy.
Yeah,
But we want to make sure that the dollar signs that come into this township are being able to be taken care of. Plus, this is an area where we'd want to designate, if we have these surplus monies, which we should, not just whatever, that they go to something functioning other than the general fund. And that's
I
something
think
we need to talk about.
There was a discussion about, X amount, could be funding, our Thunder Bay liaison, law enforcement position, education. It's a snowball. It's still a new mechanism where there's a lot that can be happening. And the people that are opening, I know I can say Men's Cafe, for example. Not only, it's not the money, and we always kind of talk about it like, oh, we need to hop on this gravy train of money. Absolutely not. That's a side note. But really, the biggest win is that you would have the ability to determine where these and how many of these places exist. The control is the win, because without having gone through this, we're going to inherently have bad actors. Every industry has its bad actors, and this won't be any different. So the win is actually zoning it appropriately and having that level of control. I see that as the big win. Because cannabis is here. Like it, love it, hate it. It is here. Right now, we're having other municipalities and business models profit on our citizens without any voice. This is the voice to have. And where does that fit?
well, then to get back to the draft,
Yeah.
and this is the
Beautiful
last thing I'm
segue.
gonna say. If you look at page 9, and this is where that slippery slope comes, just so we should be ready, because you have to have boilerplate, nothing kind of language. I hate to say that, but you do. But this is where it's hard when you're doing a special use, because this is going to be over and above the marijuana in particular. So it's saying that under D, the planning commission may grant a reduction in the separation. This is that eligible building thing that we were talking about, that if you turn somebody down, they'll come back at you, or however we want it. Or if it's like 400 feet instead of 500, we just waive that. You could potentially have people that say they want that they don't want it, in your audience too, that they're really against this. And if you give a special use, if you look at D and you see the 1, 2, and 3, if you read those, I mean, I'm not in a position to really understand that completely. It's like, I get dust, I get lighting, I get odor. I get that kind of stuff, unattractive. But this is like, will not cause a substantially adverse effect on neighboring properties and will not produce nuisance conditions to occupants. So if somebody in the audience comes in and said, well, I can smell marijuana and I feel like it's impairing me, I don't like it. With this facility that you're thinking about zoning. I mean, I'm afraid of that, you know? And then you get two, will not otherwise impair the public health, safety, general welfare of a resident. That's such boilerplate, the public health.
That's in all specials.
I know it
Yeah.
is, but I'm saying this is a very specific kind of thing. This is marijuana. This isn't trucks driving by and noises at night, you know? I mean, this is the smell. If anything else, it's the smell. Or it's the potential of the unknown, as you were saying. It's like, what did you call it? It's sort of a scary thing, you know, for people. Because it was illegal for so long. And so that and will not damage the neighborhood character. These are all some of the things we base our.
Those, how do you base that?
I'm asking, I'm saying this.
Well, I
to
don't
you.
know. How do
This
you
is the
base it on
kind of-
any special use though?
Well, I think it's easy on some
No,
because
actually,
Well, I don't know.
As zoning administrator, I will disagree with all of that. Because I have these same arguments with individuals because people aren't cutting their grass every third day.
right.
I know, because it was cloudy in Texas that Tuesday. So,
I guess that would be a
But-
violation.
so- there's gonna be.
I know there's gonna be. I'm not against any of it,
Yeah.
but this is what she's suggesting as what we, and this is normal. But this is a little bit of an unknown.
Yeah,
You know,
Some state does require that there is no odor emissions outside of this facility. And it can be shut down or intimidated for that. And then when you have a gray area like this, as you were saying, you know, will not damage the neighborhood character. That leaves up to a lot of gray area. And the gray area, it seems like a big companies in the gray area. So the more control you have over zoning, that is always your key for this.
yeah.
yeah, so I mean, that's the same as auto collision places. They have to have proper ventilation for the fumes and the smell. I mean, that's regulated at the state level. This there again is now regulated. So these are good questions.
Well, I'm saying, this is what she's giving us as an example. This is what we're reading to decide if this is what we want to pass through to the board for
So
your
then-
consideration. And I, those are the things that stick out to me.
So then
Not
there-
against it, I'm just saying. those
So
stick
then
out.
maybe this is the exercise, since I'm striking out on presentations at an alarming rate. Maybe that's where we say, okay, how do we wanna make this a little bit more black and make it a little bit more white?
I don't think you can.
Let's stay out of it. I mean, yeah.
I don't think
that
you can.
As you so succinctly put,
You can't.
zoning to a large extent has to be boilerplate, because as soon as you go too far right or too far left, you've now created a legal scenario. By keeping it gray and defining it by special use and putting stipulations case by case is where the definition and the security comes into play. So,
This is under the eligible building though. This is
Yeah, I
different.
know, this is-
That,
that's
this is a
separate.
little bit more, like if we wanted it because it's off by 100 feet. And a resident said, well, it's not proper, it's not 500. Then we say, well, but
it's the same
You
as
know.
justifying it all the way up until 2016. This commission either approved or denied. And now here we are in 2021, I believe. And Rick Dool's giving A, B, and C.
yeah,
You're defining. So we've already come out of the dark ages. Because pre-2016, it was, do you approve this? Yes. I've looked at the minutes. And these are smaller, non-related cannabis businesses that if they wanted, could probably come and.
But that citizen planner changed a lot of our, because they told us you list line and verse on your approval or disapproval.
right, blind.
And that, and
And
That's
so
way-
That's my point.
because they said a judge doesn't know planning, but he can read the, why you disapprove something. If it's according to your ordinance, you should win almost every time.
Exactly,
Yeah.
you're dotting i's and crossing. This is, it seems like a completely foreign topic because of for all intents and purposes, for most, if not everybody, especially here, it's new to everybody. You know, so,
I was thinking, would it benefit all of us to read those standards? Because that's really, the rest of this ordinance to me is,
Sure.
it is what it is. It's the standards of the state. These standards, I think, are a little more specific to us, right?
yeah,
And if we
Mhm.
agree or disagree or think we could change it, we should. And other than that, I don't have a problem with this ordinance, and I don't disagree with what Nathan had to say to add to these different, to add it to a couple of those other different.
Well, and then we would like to check into those other licenses. We might as well while we're checking, yeah.
You should check it out.
Yeah.
That's why
This
I
is
brought
the
it up.
time.
It's a time to add or just say, we'll think.
And
about
maybe
it.
we're not ready to do something like that, but at least let's look.
yeah.
I'd like to know
because-
the information.
So
on it.
then we'll
Because
approve the
even-
ordinance and the week after, we're gonna rewrite it and add some more things to it. So we don't do that.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's why even when we're going through the process of 142, which definitely, but I think everybody standing, we took our time and made sure that we did it. You also, even in that process, had the wherewithal to know that a conversation about cannabis was upcoming. Because it's already in there. So we already footnoted for this potential shift in growth change. So now it's making sure, like Ms. Rich said, the state, and to your point, Mr. Fuller, the state controls by far the vast majority. Now, what doesn't the state cover that Charter Township of Alpena wants to ensure that we address? And that's where you get into pages basically 7 through 9 of anything that's above and beyond. How do you want to sit?
I mean, you don't have to read it. If everybody's read it,
Yeah.
you could just say, is 1 okay? Is 2 okay? You know, I mean, I've read it. I don't have any problem. with any of
Well,
it.
and-
The only thing I brought up is what I brought up.
And to that point, today was really, tonight was, for all intent and purpose, going to be a presentation. And light discussion. Brock had, two gentlemen, seek the soil to smoke, consulting. Obviously, I have no familiarity with them. But they're active in the field. I wanted to kind of perpetuate and hopefully kind of kill some time, because this was another opportunity to get together. I was hoping, and actually I found some really good documentaries about, and I'll actually have Lynn email, actually I probably will, I'll do it from home, because I'm sure our firewall will block that email. But send some YouTube links to videos that help kind of give things that we wouldn't have access to, large scale facilities, to kind of have an understanding of what it looks like even. Because it's hard to, if you don't know, this isn't a podunk agricultural product. This is business at its finest. And the science of it has gone from big bushy plants on a harvest cycle of 90 to 110 days and cutting that down to ridiculously short turnarounds. And I mean, you're basically just growing a stick that has product on it and just transferring. So it's an amazing process, really, to see from just a horticultural standpoint. But there's so much we can't do because a lot of these facilities aren't local. And like I said, a lot of them are so hermetically protected that they don't want the Johnny Q public walking through and sipping their latte and say, oh, that's a pretty plant. Because then their profit margins go to crap because you walk in, you had something on your clothes. So I can hopefully get some documentaries and give you some insight into that. But I really, one of these nights, I will stay committed to providing a really good presentation. I'm a little bit perturbed, but that's like, so I guess to that point, Ms. Rich, we're gonna be still meeting soon. Is this now where, since we've had this conversation, for everybody to really make their notes outside of the state standards and say where they have questions, where
think
those
that's what this
questions
is.
lie, how much more regulation or stipulations do you want to put on? And what does it look like?
I don't think you could do much more than what she's got here.
I think it's a fairly
Pretty-
sound document.
So you get your feet wet.
Yeah, you
Well,
gotta
no,
just
that's
start.
the thing. And I
To
think we all
me-
felt that we hit after 2 years of working on ordinance 142, that we probably won't have any amendments. It is what it
Oh,
is, they're
no,
living
yeah.
documents. So that's why you can't get too specific until you know,
Like,
until you have a case that is redefined that section.
Well, go ahead. What
What's
I-
that internet site that,
Normal.
yeah,
Normal.
yeah. That was one.
Yeah, I mean, you wanna talk about, they've been at the forefront of cannabis litigation and legislation from the first stoner failed out of U of M because of hash bash, took them away from finance. They've been, I think they're California based, obviously, because everything happens first in California and everything in California. does. So,
Okay, so what I'm saying to this commission, I've read this. I don't know what else I would add or take from it. You know, I mean, because like we're all saying this is new, but this is standard kind of, this is standard for anything. And it's a little more specific to marijuana in the, and I think it's about as good as, for me, it's as good as it gets because I don't know any different, you know.
And the person that wrote it has some,
Well, yeah, the person that wrote this has gotten this from a
Yeah.
lot of different
Yeah.
information, so I personally could not add any more to this. So I feel like I'm okay with this.
The biggest thing that municipalities always want to ask themselves is how many you want to let in.
Right.
And how much control you want with that. And if you let unlimited provisioning centers in, because those are the patient facing ones, or you let unlimited processors, growers, usually put zones in the back areas where people don't see those as much. That's the big thing municipalities always have a challenge with is how many do you want to see in here? You want a free market, which was what Harrisville did. They wanted free market, and then they had a ton of applications, and said, whoa, we'll stop at free. So now they have free. So it just,
Wait, how could they do that if they didn't require that up front?
they'll have to change their,
Oh, they changed their ordinance?
Changed their ordinance.
they wrote a quick amendment.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting. Well, that's a good way to go.
Yeah.
and you don't know.
Yeah, because I don't know, and I don't think our commercial, there's only so much.
Mhm.
We don't have gobs of commercial, you know. it's all
well, and the
residential.
city's not gonna, the city's gonna,
City's separate, that's.
but they're gonna have these, so that,
Oh,
I mean,
yeah,
that's
another competition.
that's competition, yeah.
Yeah,
So I don't know, I don't know a number on that.
Well, I like that, not put a number, and if we're overwhelmed, we make it, we just change. Because like, again, our commercial, when you look at it, it's US 23 north, US south,
M32.
and M32, that's it. And what's on the south is already pretty much taken up by car dealership, emporium, I mean, there's a couple of there's empty buildings there though. That could be bought or sold,
There's some stuff that could,
yeah,
uh,
but that's the
would lend
point, that's what
itself
we're
to
trying to
be
do, right?
removed and something else built there.
So
but you can't predict the future.
I can't
So
predict
think-
who's gonna go where and what, I mean, that's why I hate to put a number on it personally, but then if we're overwhelmed, we're gonna be the capital of marijuana.
No, that people think on it.
Bay City,
Zoning helps determine that number too. So if you
Exactly.
want 500 feet distance between churches, well, then that reduces your number. That's why Alpena originally had it 500 feet buffer between churches. And they realized that basically took all of Ripley Street out of the equation. So then they
Exactly.
reduced it to 250.
well, this is why I think just exactly that point, we only have so much
Yeah.
to work with. That if we limit it to, what would we limit it to, 5? I think if we limited it, we did 5, we'd be lucky to get that many, to be honest with you.
Well, the vetting, that's why I always want to be cautious there, because if you're gonna put a cap, how are you gonna define? I think that there's people in this room that would speak very cautiously to a vetting process and those mechanisms, because inherently, the more complex you have it, the higher the probability that as a municipality will be sued.
Well, my thought, like last time, and I had the two thoughts. If it's commercial and it's legal, who are we to say what goes in there? Except the state says you can. That's it. That's the only reason that if you want to do that, the state says you can. What's that?
State says.
Well, but they're giving us permission. Doesn't mean to say we have to. That's our issue. It's up to us. If
Well,
that's,
that,
they're letting us do that.
well, and I don't know, like the city did it with rating them and they don't have one yet. So there's something wrong with that rating system.
I think Traverse City got into some trouble with that too. 'cause
Well,
they were getting
that's-
so
Everybody that's
strict.
taken that standpoint. that-
Traverse City got really nutsy cuckoo about you gotta have this, you gotta do that. We expect that. You know, they were making them
Yeah,
really
it's
jump.
Traverse City.
Oh, yeah. That's called qualification based.
Nathan, I've been studying this on my own. Like I said, Kalkaska's starting to bring in a lot. I'm really, I've been looking at this.
So, I mean, one of the things, and I can make copies of this, this is off the official website of Lara, is just some of the initial fees that anybody that starts a process
Mhm.
has to pay up front, and they make it very clear that this is a non-refundable. And when you're looking at just, let's say, growers, A, B, and C, just to start the process of handing in your paperwork. A, initial license fee, $4,000. B, $8,000. Class C, $40,000.
That's what I
There's
don't think.
inherently so many economic drivers that thin the herd that we're only gonna be talking about 1 out of 10 that even come. So if you don't know the market, maybe that's the best approach, which is you go uncapped until you realize what the
Well,
market
yeah, I
potential
agree.
is, and you
No, I
say,
disagree with
okay,
that.
now we gotta do something.
But I'm asking the commission, if we each went, what do you all think of this document? Do you think it's a good boilerplate to begin with? Other than we're gonna look at the cafe thing and how that fits in, if that's something we wanted to add.
Well, I think we should look at it.
I read it.
I read it. I reviewed it.
I read it and I can't add anything
I
to it.
can't
Or
add
take
anything
anything
to
away.
this.
That's
This is it. This is how I
Yeah,
feel.
I think it's a good
Usually a pretty
document.
good.
well, I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't see nothing glaring at me, but
I can't think of anything to add because I don't know any.
Oh, and let me also state, even with just those fees that I mentioned, even before you file for that, your pre-qualification fee is $6,000. Period. That's the pre-qualification to get you into that doorway to say, I want to go for this license, and that money's on top of that 6,000. I mean, just, I don't know.
Well,
I
there's,
think that then does everybody have this document as
Yes,
well?
I got it.
I did have it. I don't have it.
yes. I believe so.
If you want, I can make another.
I think it's at home.
Okay. But I think, yeah, I guess maybe that's the homework is this a sound draft? Is there anything that can be added or taken away? And then next time we get Denise here, let's talk about the event organizer and the other aspects there, because if we're gonna be talking about cannabis in an umbrella state, let's talk about all potentials of it, because why not have the discussion now if we're looking at the potentials of a new ordinance and amendment?
Okay, so let me make myself clear. I read this, I looked at it. I couldn't add anything more to it or subtract from it. So I'm saying I'm good with this. But other than to look at the cafe thing and that other, the three that you were
Event
talking about,
organizers
I'd like to
and
know more.
suppliers and-
Other than that, what is that? How does that get incorporated or not incorporated? We may not want that. I don't know. I don't know enough about it. So as far as I'm concerned, this is pretty good to continue with. That's how I feel.
Well, until, like I said, until you get your feet wet, you're not gonna know what questions to ask. You're not gonna.
I have to trust Denise that she's been doing this enough, that she's
Mhm.
gotten the best of the best. You kind of, we've already sorted out where it should go and not go, if you, unless you disagree with what Nathan had to say. I mean, I don't disagree with that.
I think it may makes, I'm not shooting from the hip of why I've added those additional zones for special use. There's certain things, obviously, until you know, that you have to be on infrastructure to have
Yeah.
hit all the other criteria that the state demands that you have in place for fire suppression.
Well, I love the fact that you understand that. I didn't know anything about that, so that made.
Yeah,
that gave me
he was a
comfort, you
fireman
know?
once too, so.
I was?
Yes.
Don't
In
tell
your
me.
past life,
Tom.
yeah.
I was never a police.
So I mean, knowing that you really understand this pretty well, I mean, and you're looking at it from your eyes, I feel pretty comfortable.
I think it's, as it stands, I think it's a fairly steadfast position. Outside of, like you mentioned, adding some special use to different zones.
And the events, you know, if the tractor club wanted to have a marijuana event, here, put your keys in this bucket on Friday, we'll give them back to you on Sunday.
There's been an unofficial marijuana event taking place in the township.
We're good.
For 40 years. It happens every year on French Road.
Well, that's it.
That's the
and
tractor
neighbors
place, right?
Happy about it.
Oh, that's good.
Haven't heard any complaints, so maybe they make some good grounds.
Well, you know, events are not,
Events are always, I mean, the only events that we really have any say in is to give a tip of the hat for potential noise and traffic, and that's the tractor club on French Road. And then the only other applicant is on an annual basis is the courtyard for having their outdoor concert for the 4th of July.
Don't we do something for also Long Lake?
Oh, yeah, but they did, well, I think maybe because COVID this year, but yeah, so there's 3 primary events that come to the township asking for permission. And not that the state, it's kind of a farce even now as it stands. There's no control mechanism that we can disallow it, so. And we don't have a noise ordinance, we do, ordinance 94, but it is solely pertained to moving vehicles and base decibels. So we have no control. But nonetheless, if we're gonna have an overarching conversation of cannabis, let's talk about even ones that seemingly are in their infancy or don't pertain to our community. I think these are potentially to be a conversation a couple of more years down the road when the state figures out how to look at that business model and make something jive there, because it's at least my intent to, as it should be, to increase our tax base in a sustainable manner. And this is shown throughout every state that has started this process to be more than sustainable. And I don't still have no presentation, so
oh, that's okay.
I'll be having that conversation off camera.
We can send it.
You were part of the presentation.
Well, thank you very much. I hope I answered all your questions.
Well, I thought you were very informative.
Yes,
Thank you.
very much so.
Really appreciate that.
Yeah.
You seem to know your stuff.
There was, I kind of hinted, but yes, he's been through the process with in our community already. And so how not best to learn by example? And we can learn from the city or learn from other applicants. But we're in this process right now to be that dry sponge and learn the mistakes of other municipalities and make sure that we have as sound as we can. You're never gonna hit it out of the park the first time around. So knowing that, as long as we're at a position where that draft, as Ms. Rich said, and I heard it, there's nothing that can be added or taken away.
From my point.
And if we're not limiting numbers, then we don't have to do that qualification
And that-
based
that's-
scenario
I just
where,
wanna, yeah.
because that is so
see if
hard
you were
to,
there to throw a flag, because that scares me.
well, because it's the person presenting can sell the,
Oh, yeah.
maybe they're not nearly as good, but they can sell themselves better. And so that's very difficult to to add those. I mean, you can give your number, but if somebody offends you, well, you give them a 5 instead of maybe they deserve the 8 or whatever, you know, and that's really tough.
And you don't want it to be a popularity contest. That's totally illegal.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah, I guess in that same breath, I say, let's stand back on our heels and pull a Harrisville. let's see what really comes down the pipe. Because, and from your position, Mr. Curry, let's say, commission moves this to the board approves it. We start, and the first case comes to this, it's still gonna, even once they come to the planning commission for whatever license under special use, that is only one of the moving pieces in the mechanism to start a process. From what I've heard is 1 to 2 years that can take up. I mean, what's the quickest? I haven't heard of any business turning around after municipal approval in less than a year.
Oh, it's getting faster, but it takes a long time, and depends how the municipality wants to handle building permits. You coincide building permits with the application, or do you wait for that to go to special land use before you give them the building permit? And it really just depends on how fast you want to move it.
Go.
I was wondering, do you think it would be a good idea for the board to just look at this draft themselves before we start, to see if there's something they'd like to add before, or would you think that's after the process, that once we decided this is what we think, then if they want to change something, they could?
I think I'm gonna let the supervisor answer that. Only for the fact that he is more in touch with the different board members than I would be.
Because, I mean, if they
There's
don't
times I go
wanna
and I don't
do
talk to
this,
Henny for a long time.
we're spinning our wheels. I mean, that's like my attitude. I'm ready to just send that, you know, it's like. If you
But I
don't
think
wanna
more
do it-
minds and more people and more talk, then you start getting, I've got 7 here already.
Because the only thing that I'm looking for after this is the cafe information on that. That just would be added in.
I guess, to the deferral that was so graciously given, I think that the position that I'll take on that question is that it is this commission's responsibility to give a steadfast recommendation. You guys do all the groundwork, and we look at that recommendation as a board and act accordingly.
And let them review it.
I would say that if I were a betting man, that there is support. And the reason I say that, and surprisingly, came out of a deputy's mouth of, it's already here. His frustrations are on his professional side, like I stated earlier. And they're noted. Because there's no way to test active, well, there is, but how efficient is a blood draw?
And it's timely and expensive.
To test nanograms, and what is that threshold? There's a lot of questions that are gonna be continuing, and conversations that are gonna continue. How are employers, how are state, especially once the federal mechanisms potentially and hopefully decriminalize and remove this from the preponderance of it ever being a Schedule I drug.
Because the banks would like this money.
We have a new credit union that just opened up, one shut down because of nefarious practices. But where one died, new mushroom popped up. And there's a planning commission member that's in the financial district. And this is a topic that,
Sounds like their credit union would take that money if they were allowed to.
what mechanism wouldn't want?
Yeah, really. Why not
So-
bank?
And right now, I think the nearest banking, I think there's one in Traverse City that's trying to get established, but that's the only one in northern Michigan.
What's
So
open
now,
one?
so now when you think about that, there's where you have to give those extra considerations to the transport license, because they're right now, if they can't get to Traverse City, they're driving all the way primarily to southeastern Michigan, where a lot of this kind of, the bigger money started the conversation. So you're gonna have a lot of trucks on the road, and they're not marked, you don't know them, but it's the canary after the spider, and now there's a cat chasing the canary. So how do you gauge it? And you don't know how to gauge it until the business model is actually in play.
till you get going on it.
So what's everybody think?
Well, personally, I think what's here, I trust Denise, and I guess my feeling is, I think there's a lot of good work went into this. I think it's a good start, if you will. And to the question that was asked of you, is and I can understand going back and bringing it up from the bottom right through the system again with changes that somebody, so we don't have to screw with it up there. And I can understand that, but my concerns are other than this. I think this is excellent kind of thing. And again, I'll throw it out there on the table, is that all night long again, I have not heard one word about culture. It's here. We know this here. And I have 2 children that are involved in the school system and in the medical field. And I spent a lot of time going through books in the Upper Peninsula looking at. My concerns aren't this. My concerns are, how in the hell do we equate money against the culture? And it's here, we know it's here. But the thing of it is that's why Nathan's getting other factual people here to talk about that. Because a lot of the people that I've spoken with, and I've spoken with a lot of people. In fact, I just was over getting the fat put on my knees. And the surgeon and I had a discussion brought it up and we talked about it. And they got a negative concern about it. And medical wise, it's not a problem. But we know it's here. What the crap do we do? Talk to law enforcement. They understand the money side, but it's like Nathan said, they have a problem out there. How do we do it? And do we make it easier? We know they're being delivered from Roger City. We know it's being delivered from Harrisville. Do we make it easier for the young people, people in their late 20s and 30s, to get the marijuana on the street? Do we have events take place where people are coming up here for tours, spend tourist dollars to attend a drug situation? And you know, anybody that's been there, and I've been around the country a little bit too, and you know that it starts out with marijuana, but there's a hell of a lot of other stuff going on during the events that are out there as marijuana thing. And this is not negative stuff as far as us doing it. Those are the concerns that the people I've talked to.
It's the moral dilemma.
It's the more, not only the moral dilemma,
Yeah,
but it's
gotcha.
the cultural, the medical thing. And I'm all for the medical. I got no problem with that. I know some people like that have, and I probably would benefit from it. But the thing of it is that it's what we make available out there, and by saying and doing this, are we making it easier for kids to become addicted to something else, or young people? All I'm saying is that I think this is a damn good piece of stuff.
Yeah, well,
That's where we're at.
and I think that's always gonna be, you
That's
know,
gonna be the problem.
it would be the same as me saying, you know, I drank alcohol like it was my job. I don't, because I was an ass. I just wasn't mature enough to see that I was an ass. Made that decision. This board decision is zoning, not morality.
Right, exactly.
And I think that's the gray area that's being twisted there, is we know that inherently there's that morality tail.
It's like
And we
gambling.
have to be
It's like
cognizant.
gambling.
It's the same thing.
Would you
But
want
it's the
to
same as
gambling in
alcohol.
your
Alcohol
community,
too, yeah.
even though it's legal? I mean,
See, and we've got to be so, I think we've got to have a plan B out there for, if we need to hire new employees, we've got to look at everything, and I think, I'm glad that's been brought up. But, you know, one of the things is that the morality, we're not here to judge that.
I,
But at the same time, I think what we have to be careful of is the community members that are going to be against this. That's why we need to have our ducks in a row. We have to have everything ready so we can go back and explain why we recommended this to the board. Because there'll be people that'll be very, very upset with us as a commission that have allowed this to take place, just as there is in the city.
Well, we haven't allowed it.
But they think we do.
wrote it, but it's the board that allowed it.
But
Those
they
are the people
think
that are
we have
voted
that.
in.
Yeah, but the general population out there, except for people that are in the know, their feeling is that we have that control, whether we do or not. They're gonna say, it all started right there in the commission. That's my only concern.
Well, I'm 100% in agreement with you. I totally get that moral thing. I do, it bothers me.
Yeah, it bothers
But then I also know that unfortunately, we are the body that writes the law in a sense for the township. Now, the beauty of it is, we're not elected. Our job is to strictly do that job. And that's what this is, because it was voted in, as we talked about, legally. It is up to the board, who are voted in by their constituents, to determine whether they should listen to their constituents and turn it down. That's their job. That's how I would answer that question if somebody asked me that. It's not my job. And I totally agree with the moral. I do. I get where you're coming from. Totally do.
Well, you have to. We're all, we all come from a different, we're all on a different path.
Because there's
We're
always
just all-
something out there
So-
that's not good. And
There's always something, and my point was, to be honest, alcohol's probably worse than cannabis.
Yeah, and we've
But-
seen.
But we've grown in a society where that is acceptable.
Yeah, but we've also recognized what's happened with the alcohol, just exactly like you
Yeah.
said.
Yeah,
And-
and it started at.
But it's
people
not just
in my
alcohol.
parents, your age, that was how they were raised, and it's, at
it's
some point in time, we
gambling.
gotta break that culture, and this topic is coming in with such a level of education behind it. It's not the same argument anymore.
Yeah.
You can't say that marijuana is addictive because it's been disproven. You can't say that it's a gateway drug because that's a conversation that this is trying to flood and disperse and create side arguments and distract from the reality. And it gets right down to that simple fact for me at least.
Plus, you have to be an adult to buy it.
Opportunity for every human being of age to make those decisions.
Make that decision.
I'll tell you
And
who's
so-
getting it is it's the
Can't
illegal
hold that
stuff is getting to the younger people. It's the legal stuff that's protecting that. I mean, because it's expensive. They gotta go buy it. You gotta be 18 or 21 and older. You know, this is actually almost, and it's forcing that underground. It's forcing that to be a legal thing that the younger kids are gonna have a hard time getting.
Yeah, and see, and the other thing too is out there on the table is that, just like I was speaking with the newspaper situation where they had the article in there about homeless children. Okay, the feedback to the homeless children is that there was a percentage, and I don't have it right at the, but there was a percentage of those families that were into growing marijuana, using marijuana, or having drug situations. Okay, I'm just trying, I know. you just
I'm
waited.
gonna call yes. There's a lot of
Okay,
dissent.
so what I'm saying
It's
is
not
that in the homeless situation, we have some years, look at what alcohol has done through the years and have done to the families. And all of a sudden, in our newspaper, I'm not saying that cannabis is the problem with that, but in our newspaper, if they're out now in the community and people are talking about homeless kids, why are the kids homeless? Because talking with somebody that's also involved in a distribution or retail situation, a bag, you probably know this better than I do, is that I was told that a bag, I don't know what size, $1,000, okay? $500 for what they call the half bag or something like that. That's a lot of money for somebody to come up with, not to buy just a couple of hits or whatever they call it. But the concern is that culturally in our community, even though we just make the laws, we still have to provide laws that are going to be inductive to a good community and a good response. So the thing of it is that the money has to come from someplace. Just on the news today, we're talking about one of the reasons that they're having a lot of problem with police and that defunding thing is that now people are stealing. And they're not going back to work. I know I've been trying to find 3 employees for 6 months here and I'm having a tough time. Kind of thing to find just people who want, and I don't understand why people are done work, but the money that it costs to go to the fancy place that is doing $60,000 a week. Paperwork I was shown, $60,000 plus or minus a week, kind of thing. The money's got to come from someplace, and it's not all from rich people. It's not all from rich people, and that's my concern. We make the laws and we pass it on and that kind of thing, but there are other things that need to be considered in the community, and we're not in the moral situation. I don't think this is great, but I just want to just get it on the table. There's other things, and we may not be responsible for the morality of it, but we still live in the community.
Well,
I want to throw one more thing up.
No, go ahead.
Here you got this device, every time you turn on the TV, now you can gamble on your phone.
Exactly.
I mean, you don't even have to get out of your chair.
Yeah, that's scary to me.
And that, to me, is almost
Very
more scary
It
because,
is.
Oh, yeah.
so you start throwing all these vices that are out there. It isn't just marijuana. I'm not
No,
that big on that, but then you got all that things. But every time I turn on the TV, somebody's saying, oh, you can just turn it on, put your app on there. You can spend $1 and you won't even lose, but you'll win 400. Oh my gosh.
I don't even know how to do
Quick
it.
story, just a quick story. You guys
I know
something was-
Kevin had a comment. Like,
Yeah.
Oh, but I.
Let me just say this
Yeah.
one time, we're talking about that, I'm well aware of that, I had a good friend who just passed away a bit ago, okay? Into the gambling thing, nobody knew about it, he was on the computer, he got into his both children's life insurance, gone. Their life insurance is gone, left the widow with nothing, and she didn't even know he was gambling. Good friend, but, and I had no idea, I'm in camp, buddy, and, had no idea, but that's exactly what.
There's, there's always this perpetual morality tale, and I don't mean any disrespect. It's just, it's a vacuum of misinformation that doesn't just look at fact. And this is, I think, Ms. Ricks hit it right on the head. Everybody, myself included, we make the best choices or the worst choices, and it's our way to deal with it. And so that's always the threshold. You have to give consideration, but it's not this commission's position to tell people how to live their lives.
And I agree with you 100%, that's not what I'm saying, I'm saying it's out there in the community, folks.
I know.
And
what you're
we,
talking-
and we are going to have to deal with it because.
So, and to that, I haven't had a single negative person contact me since these conversations have even started. There are, obviously, I'm not blind to the fact that there's people against it. But I think every day that does pass, even the people that used to be against it are seeing that it's really nothing to be against anymore, and better to actually have some control and define it than turn a blind eye. Because if I have safely say that if we don't have honest conversation now, these same organizations are gonna come in and they're gonna still do what they want to do. We just lost the ability to have any control. And now we're gonna be going after and calling up police and saying, yeah, they can grow it, but we didn't pass the ordinance. And so it's this 2.5 1.
I think it's good that we're having this
Oh,
conversation,
absolutely.
because the community has to know that we're aware of the situation and we've had this conversation. And I think that's important. Yeah, you had a point.
No, I mean, you are dealing with something very timely, very difficult, it's very emotional, it's historical, and now you have the financial aspect of it coming in too. So it's like this culmination of so many different aspects you have to look at. It's very hard, but what we do know is that prohibition doesn't work. When you stop everything from giving education to anyone, they will still get it. They will get it illicitly and it'll be unsafe. When you provide access, when you provide education, have these talks like this, that's when you start realizing, okay, it works in with our community. The fact that you were talking about with the doctor,
Yeah.
I think that shows that there's so many more, aspects to this than just the
Oh, yeah, and my dentist, I just got my tooth put back in. If nobody's noticed, it's temporary, but a new one's coming.
Oh, I noticed.
Now you're bright smile.
And they had a study that came out that just showed that the municipalities and states that allowed medical recreational had a adolescent drop in medical marijuana use.
That's it.
And that comes with education and access. When you educate people, when you give them access to it, they're not probably trying to get a hold of it in, unknown amounts from unknown sources.
Takes the mystique away.
And also, you don't know what you're getting,
Exactly.
which could be really bad.
That's
I
the
mean,
scary
for the younger kids, they don't know what they're
But so getting to this whole kind of narrowing down, this is good conversation of a morality tale of if this is to kind of come to fruition, I guess when I start looking at things that are detriments to our community, we can look in the newspaper as of past few days. There may be a good funding mechanism to actually combat the crystal meth problem that we have in this community. The heroin problem
Heroin.
has been going on since I graduated from high school.
Yeah.
And you know what? You look at all the unkeyed data up until 2016, 95% of all their busts are cannabis related. And so now cannabis, but you know what? You would think that there would be a paradigm shift. Okay, cannabis is legal. Now let's focus on the drugs that are really a detriment to our community. And it's still not taking place. When is that conversation really going to come to the forefront? They dug up a girl's body. And we're still not really having that conversation. There's a problem. That problem, unfortunately, you can say, well, she didn't get to crystal meth until she smoked cannabis. I can tell you that's a farce. People that go to that end, they've started with tobacco, alcohol, way long ago. It's a choice, even in an imbecile child's brain, it's still a choice. I was that imbecile child for a long time in my life because I started drinking when I was too young to comprehend what it was like to be an adult. So I think I'm getting some of those wirings taken care of, but it's not this position to say, it's this position of this commission to say, this is the best we can do for our community in regards to this topic. And when the people say, well, shame on you, commission, for allowing that, then by all means, I love appointing each and every one of you. You've done a fine job representing this township. And if that means in 2024, because of certain policies that I don't get reelected, but our townships made progress for the betterment of the township, still a win in my book. Because I don't want to hold this position for 24 years and do nothing. I get a lot of heat because I look at every time I'm elected, I have 4 years to make the best impact to this community. I'm not looking to that 5th year because that's a bad mindset. Right now, we're looking at a topic that is here no matter how we do it. Denise has helped us craft it. I think we're pretty close. I think we've always had very valuable conversation, but we need to make the best opportunity for our community so that the children's children that are growing here have that educational component, have the ability to know. I look at my son and knowing what I did to this point in my life, what he's going to have to deal with when he turns 8, and it frightens me. But I also know that I survived. So as long as he gets the proper education, he will actually have that ability to make the best decisions when he gets to be of age, to go awry or do whatever he wants. But I look at it as that. We have 4 years, I have 4 years to make the best decisions for the entire township, for sustainable growth, and no matter what market that may be. Right now, we're having that discussion based on cannabis. I think it's not a bad thing. I think that the only reason that we're still having this bad thing and the what ifs and oh my goodnesses is because for everybody's lifetime, up until a few years ago, this was a topic of taboo. And so it's unlearning certain things that we're told and replacing it hopefully with fact. And I think this process has been hopefully educational for everybody. I've learned a lot going through all of Denise's and other examples of other communities. But
Well, to go along with you, Chuck, I'll tell you a little story about my own. I have a daughter that graduated from Michigan State Quality, food scientist. And so she went through her getting jobs and then she wanted to move to California. And I'm kind of conservative. She says, I got a job being a quality assurance person for a marijuana facility. I'm like, what am I supposed to tell my friends? I mean, I really was upset by it. I'm like, we didn't send you through college for that. And she's like, Mom, you don't get it. It's medical marijuana. And she explained the whole process to me and what her job would be, you know, and how it was very precise. It's just to your point, you can't walk in there. You have to, it's very, very much a job. Like it wasn't like, but my immediate reaction was like, marijuana? Are you kidding me? Like, I'm ashamed. You know, I didn't say that. No, I didn't say that to her. But then she just started laughing. She goes, Mom, it's a job. And I go, yeah, it is. You gotta make your way.
I don't know
So.
if they know the scale.
But that job
Yeah.
needed her knowledge and requirements.
Well, now she has a great, it just helped her get into the next job, And it was really, honestly, after that, I thought, well, heck yeah. I said, well, why don't you come back to Michigan? They're really going gangbusters here with that. They need good quality insurance people with this marijuana stuff. So it just kind of that mindset, and then it just kind of melted because it was my daughter. You know, it's not so bad, I guess.
Yeah, there's lots of stuff.
She explained it to me in a very, very educational way. It wasn't some dirty thing under the rug, you know, like horrible. It was this facility in California, and this was very strict and very, her job was a certain.
Well, the medical side of it, I don't think there's,
Yeah.
the word on the street out there is that it's a fantastic thing and it keeps kids, saves kids from situations and what we have, the gentleman who's here says it helps him with his cancer, whether it does or
Yeah.
not. He thinks it does psychologically, and so that's a big plus.
Work.
And it's probably healing his body, whether or not it's chemically helping.
So I guess for my notes, I have, for the next time when we get back together, Denise is going to add some clarification and some discussion to the other licensures, the event organizer.
And then to make the changes to what you thought.
Yeah.
I don't think we disagree with that. I don't disagree with it. I mean, I don't know about anybody else.
I mean, I guess I still look at it, it's no matter what, it's always gonna become, because everything is gonna be a case by case scenario. Is it X amount of feet from this? I mean, there's.
Yeah.
But,
All right.
yes, with that being said, the educational thing, the professionalism is the mechanism that adds an unfiltered clarity. Because the hush hush and the gray market of cannabis it's kind of like the old moonshining days. It's gonna end. The sun sets here. So, and that added a lot of clarity. It's not a fix all. But there,
Moonshine was worse
oh yeah, well, hey.
than ever.
Yeah, well, it's shine.
They're
But anyway.
they're currently dismantling or trying to dismantle the carrier system, so
Yeah.
that is going to force a lot more people into either the illicit market or into. That's a big thing that's happening right now in the shift in the marijuana industry.
I mean, just by listening to you, you really explained how quickly things change even at the state level. This is an ongoing, like when my person told me there was a cafe in Kalkaska, I said, there's no way there's a cafe there because they don't have licenses for it. And she said, well, I know that they do. And I said, listen, I've been doing this for a year at the ordinance level and I've never heard. And I said, it's probably at the state level and they're just trying to figure out what they're doing. And these people are just gonna get ready for it. That's what I guessed. And that's what I think it was. So, yeah. So that was new, because I know Las Vegas has them.
Yeah.
But you said downstate they even have them now, so.
Yeah, they're trying. They ran an issue in Vegas where you have people come
Right.
purchase. You can't smoke in public, you can't smoke in a hotel room, and you can't get out of the plane with it. So they, they.
Except for when my cousin who just flew back, she was just like, I got so high in the elevator at
Yeah.
the Venetian because everybody was heading to the airport and smoking what they had left.
But see, that's where the issue lies.
Can't take up with
That's
it.
where the issue lies.
Yeah, that's where the issue lies.
Now that they will find an outlet.
Because I don't personally want to walk into an elevator like that.
And those people weren't punching the flight attendants out either. They were just,
They were just mellow.
You get the after breeze.
About 9 different elevators that it could happen, so it's a limited market.
I mean, when we go camping, I'm walking around the campground with my dog and it's at night, man, it smells. I mean, I laugh to myself. I think it's kind of funny. They're in their little pup tents. Yeah, it doesn't work, I can tell you.
They don't even do it. in public.
Okay. So then, Chair,
I think,
I think that you're on the books for your next meeting. You have the 26th, which is the public hearing.
yes, public hearing on the,
I'm not gonna be traveling.
I'll do a wonderful job. With
Yeah.
minutes.
That's you.
Yet another hat.
yeah, public hearing on the, adding the medical usage on the B3 zone. Yeah,
Public hearing.
we're gonna add the medical, allowing the medical in the B3 zone.
Okay.
The 26th.
27.
That's
Yeah.
something, that's
Yeah,
not
no,
about
that's
this.
the public.
See,
hearing.
That's a different.
we
thing.
approved
That's
the,
not-
anyway, we approved the
Second
Starbucks and it's supposed to be like a quick care next to Meyer but it's a B3 zone and medical is not allowed in a B3 zone for some reason, but we don't know why we didn't have it in our, so we're gonna,
Plus we had a
Pass it.
parking space issue, didn't we?
yeah, and then parking spaces too. They wanted more parking spaces than we required, but we don't know why we put a maximum on it, but you know, when you have a new document, you always find a few things in there that
along with
you
this.
have to change.
So I will, I'll have Lynn do another poll. Because I think the business is gonna be on the 26th, is gonna be site specific to the business that's forthcoming. So it'll be a poll to look into November, obviously.
What about our main meeting?
Your main meeting right now is still on the books. Now, if we don't have any cases, you can have that conversation. Otherwise, I'm still gonna have everybody polled just to see what Denise's availability is and overlay it with a quorum to keep some consistency going.
Okay, so the second Monday would be the 8th. Okay, so that would be okay.
So she's free, though.
That's,
Yeah.
that's
I
my
like the
hope.
6 o'clock.
Do you like the 6 o'clock?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
but we can't change it yet unless, if we have a case, we can't change it.
No, if you have a case, you can't change it.
Because-
You can have the information at 6 that we work.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I guess.
That's fine with
This is
me.
a
Yeah,
workshop, so there's no motions, but you can, if you're fine with 6 o'clock, unless there's, as trustee Foley said, if there's a case, that case would start at 7. So if you wanted to start at 6 and start a workshop and then go right to a case.
Because really all we've been talking about then is the cafe thing. and
Yeah.
See what we think of that.
Yeah, and I really do want to have a good presentation so I've been hitting that same, I've been hitting that same trailer.
yeah,
Oh,
that's fine.
no, no. Oh, no, I'll see Mr. Courier on the. Okay, so Chair, anything else for the good of the order?
I think we're good.
Okay.
We're dismissed.
Okay.